Financial services firm Lehman Brothers filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on September 15, 2008. The filing remains the largest bankruptcy filing in U.S. history, with Lehman holding over $600 billion in assets. Europe had a lot of shares invested in Lehman Brothers, and this is why it affected them so badly. November 26, 2008, the Commission adopted a comprehensive action plan for a coordinated response to the economic crisis. The plan aims to restore consumer and business confidence, restore lending and stimulate investment in the EU's economies, create jobs, and help the unemployed back to work. In December, the European Council approved the European Economic Recovery Plan, equivalent to about 1.5% of the GDP of the European Union, a figure amounting to around 200 billion euros. The plan provides a common framework for the efforts made by member states and by the European Union, with a view to ensuring consistency and maximizing effectiveness. So in December, the EBC announced to lower to 2.5% its main refinancing operations in the euro area, starting from operations to be settled on December 10, 2008. This cut is the biggest reduction since the introduction of the euro. October 7, 2009, today the European Commission adopted reports under the corrective arm of the Stability and Growth Pact of Austria, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Germany, Italy, Slovenia, the Netherlands, and Portugal. In December, Greece admits that its debt has reached 300 billion euros. It is the highest in modern history. December 1st and December 2nd, the Council agreed to create 3 European authorities to supervise banking, insurance, and security markets. The authorities are the European Banking Authority, the European Insurance and Occupation Pensions Authorities, and the European Securities and Markets Authority. May 2010, it was the creation of the European Financial Stability Facility, and later on, the European Stability Mechanism, with €500 billion fund to enable financial stability. May of the same year, Greece's budget deficit was not 3.5% as reported, but 13.6%. So the first bailout package of €110 billion to Greece was delivered. In November, European finance ministers agreed that providing assistance to Ireland is warranted to safeguard financial stability in the EU and the euro area. 2011, May 24th, the European Commission, on behalf of the European Union, issued a €4.75 billion bond with a 10-year maturity to fund disbursements of the assistance packages to Ireland and Portugal. In August, the euro falls against other currencies. The EBC buys Spanish and Italian debt. In October, Belgium's biggest lender falls into crisis and receives a bailout. The Eurozone countries agree to write down Greek debt by 50%. January 2012, S&P downgrades debt of 8 euro countries, which included Italy, Spain, Portugal, Cyprus, Austria, Malta, Slovakia, and Slovenia. March of that same year, Greece received their second bailout package with a value of 130 billion euros. In November, Spanish banks bailed out with 37 billion euros. Spain received this money as bank rescue package to save their national bank.
November 2013. In order to respond to the drop of inflation in the Eurozone and the increasing unemployment rates, the ECB lowered its main rate by a quarter percentage point to a record low of 0.5%. April 2014. The Eurozone finance ministers decided to release more than 8 billion euros of further bailout funds to Greece, adding up to around 140 billion euros in the last 2 years. In October of the same year, European stock market tumbles again on global growth fears. Greek stock market fallen 35% since mid-June. In December, Greece gets bailout extension and brings forward presidential poll. Greece's parliament has failed to elect a new president for the country in a third and final round of voting, forcing an early general election.
In June and July of 2015, Greece closes banks and imposes capital control. After bailout talks between the left-wing government and foreign lenders broke down at the weekend, the European Central Bank froze vital funding support to Greece's banks, leaving Athens with little choice but to shut down the system to keep the banks from collapsing. Greece and its creditors agree a third bailout, imposing further spending cuts on the country to avoid bankruptcy and exit of the Eurozone. Why did the crisis in Europe develop? Some people blame Southern Europe, others blame the Irish, some Greek bailouts, other austerity measures, some even blame Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, government bonds, the Troika, and they even blame tax relief. Ones love him, others hate him. The youngest in Greek history, 40-year-old Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras. In his opinion, the austerity built by the conservatives, the liberals, and the social democrats lead to the worsening of the crisis. In the first place, Jean-Claude Juncker, current president of the European Commission. Secondly, Martin Schulz, the president of the European Parliament, describing them as people who had graved the political responsibility for the failure of the austerity programs. Last but not least, the neoliberal European establishment, Angela Merkel, and her political allies. Alexis claims that Merkel had taken the advantage of the crisis in order to impose the Anglo-Saxon liberal capitalism in Europe. On the other hand, 10 times winner of Forbes' Most Powerful Women, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, is another polemic player in the Euro crisis. According to Merkel, countries in crisis are guilty for not having the ability to implement the bailout and austerity measures that were agreed for these governments, as well as for not controlling their spending budget and debt, and improper application of the fiscal policies and tax evasion. Besides, the so-called austerity measures are just a budget balance in their point of view, and they are not as evil as everybody thinks. Before 2001, Greece was treated as a middle economy country where investors would not lend money because they saw them as credit risk. However, when Greece joined the Eurozone in 2001, investors no longer saw Greece as credit risk country because they thought that with the Euro-Greek economy would grow. Greece started borrowing money with low rates from investors in other countries, but when Greece had to pay its debts, it was impossible for the country to pay. In the 2008 financial crash, Greece was very seriously affected like many other countries, but unlike other countries, they were not able to climb out of the hole because they couldn't print more currency like they had done before to get out of trouble. They had to face recession. By this time, unemployment was up by 28%. Companies suddenly stopped paying their workers, forcing them to leave and search for another job they would never find. Greece's first bailout was in 2010. The EBC started handing out loans to Greece as long as they started spending cuts and tax hikes. Even with these loans, Greece continued to spiral down. A second bailout was given to them, making the total amount given to Greece 169 billion euros. This was also the years in which car loans reached a record with a value of 8 billion euros. This is equal to 39% of Greece's GDP. For the last 5 years, Greece has been negotiating financial assistance with the International Money Fund, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission. The IMF is the institution that has been lending money to the country on the condition that Greece raises its taxes and stops spending. In consequence, unemployment and poverty have been increasing, causing anger among the population. In the latest election, we can see the political discontent when Greeks rejected its two main political parties. In March, Greece makes IMF debt repayment as tensions with Germany grow. On April 20th, Athens demands cash reserves from public sector funds. And in June and July, the European Central Bank ends emergency funding. Greece closes banks and imposes capital control. Athena's stock exchange closes. In July, the referendum voters reject European Union bailout terms. Greece and its creditors agree a third bailout. Spending cuts on the country to avoid bankruptcy and exit of the Eurozone was necessary.
But finally, after all this mess, we have come up with a better solution and found the light at the end of the tunnel.
We have seen in the past few years that the EU has decided to write off the debt of many countries, which is actually kind of giving the money away. So our proposal is based on that idea. Instead of lending money to countries with interest rates and imposing fines if they are not able to pay, which only aggravates the situation, we believe that the solution is a proper fiscal and economic integration where they can act as a single country divided in many states. A union where there is a fair distribution of money and, more importantly, circulation of money. This way, wealthier economies will not lend money and lose part of it because their borrowers are not able to pay. Instead, all countries will contribute and maybe provide the money that they are not using or that is not of need in their country, recycling their money to help others in need. With this, the economy would be solidary not because they're obliged to, but because in this way the economy as a whole would be rebuilt somehow and everyone could benefit from it. A fiscal framework that can be applied equally and fairly for all EU countries is also needed. We think that even though many countries will refuse to this idea now, they have to seek the greater good for them and the countries of the Eurozone in the future.